You know, any great plan is just a piece of paper until you have the right structure to bring it to life. Today, we're jumping into a core management skill, organizing. Think about it. If planning is deciding what you're going to do, then organizing is all about figuring out how you're actually going to get it done. Let's dive in.
I absolutely love this way of looking at it because it just makes so much sense, right? A blueprint is useless until you have the scaffolding, the materials, and the people ready to build. Organizing is that critical hands-on step that turns a strategy into a real, breathing, functioning team. It's the bridge that gets you from an idea to a reality.
And here's the more, let's say, textbook definition. At its heart, organizing is about designing the intentional structure of an organization. It's the puzzle of putting jobs and people together in just the right way so they can all work together efficiently and pull in the same direction. So, here's our game plan for today. We'll start with the big picture, the blueprint. Then, we'll get into the 6 essential building blocks. We'll see how managers divide and group work, how they define who's in charge, and finally, how power and rules get decided.
Okay, first up, the 6 building blocks. I want you to think of these as the essential tools in any manager's toolkit. These are the levers you pull and the dials you turn to shape how your company or your team actually operates.
And here they are, the big 6. Work specialization, departmentalization, the chain of command, span of control, centralization versus decentralization, and formalization. These 6 elements are basically the DNA of any organization structure, and we're about to unpack every single one.
All right, let's get into our first section, dividing and grouping work. See, the very first thing you have to do when you're building a structure is to take the huge amount of work that needs to be done, break it down into smaller, manageable jobs, and then group them back together in a way that makes sense.
This brings us to our first building block, work specialization. You've probably heard of it as the division of labor. The classic example? Henry Ford's assembly line. Instead of one person trying to build an entire car, the job was sliced into tiny, repetitive tasks. You put on the wheels. The next person installs the steering column. That's work specialization in its purest form.
But here's the really interesting part. It's a massive trade-off. On the one hand, specialization can be incredibly efficient. People get really, really good at their one thing, and it's a breeze to train new folks. But if you push it too far, jobs can become incredibly boring and repetitive, and that can lead to burnout, low morale, and people heading for the door. It's a real balancing act.
Let's make this super concrete with an example from quantity surveying. Instead of having one QS try to do everything on a project, the work gets specialized. You'll have one person who's just the estimator. They're an expert at pricing. Then you have a post-contract QS who manages costs during the build. And maybe you even have a claims specialist who is a master of disputes. Each one is a specialist, which drives up the quality and efficiency of the whole operation.
Okay, so we've split the work up into all these specialized jobs. What's next? Well, you have to group them back together somehow, and that's called departmentalization. You need to cluster related jobs so that all those individual specialists can coordinate and work toward the same big picture goal.
And there are a ton of ways to do this. You can group people by their function. All the accountants go in finance, all the engineers in engineering, or you could do it by product, with separate divisions for, say, residential projects versus road projects. You can even group by geography, by process, or by the type of customer you're serving. The right answer really depends on what the company's trying to achieve.
Now, the most common way to do it is by function, just like you see here. It makes sense, right? Experts get to work with and learn from each other. But here's the big risk, and it's called the silo effect. This is when the engineering department gets so focused on its own bubble that it stops talking to the commercial department. And pretty soon, nobody's really thinking about what's best for the company as a whole.
Let's move on to part 2, defining authority and control. So once you've grouped all the work, you've got to have a clear hierarchy. This part is all about figuring out who reports to whom and just how many people each manager is responsible for.
This brings us to the famous chain of command. It's that clear, unbroken line of authority that runs from the very top of the company all the way down to the newest hire. At its core, it answers one simple but absolutely critical question. If I have a problem, who do I go to? An org chart, like this one for a marketing team, is the perfect picture of a chain of command. You can literally see the lines of authority. You can trace the path from the marketing director at the top, down to the managers, and then to every single team member. There's zero confusion about who is accountable to whom. So baked into this idea is a really crucial principle, unity of command.
This means that every employee should have one and only one direct boss. Just imagine you're a QS on a construction site, and your project manager tells you to do one thing, but then the commercial director from the head office calls and tells you to do the exact opposite. Who do you listen to? That chaos is exactly what unity of command is designed to prevent.
All right, our next building block is span of control. This one is all about asking, how many people can a single manager effectively lead? Is the magic number 4, or can they handle 40? The answer to that question dramatically changes how an organization looks and how much it costs to run.
A narrow span, where a manager only has a few people reporting to them, is great for close supervision. But it also creates a lot of management layers, which is expensive and can make communication painfully slow. On the flip side, a wide span is cheaper and gives employees more freedom. But there's a danger that managers get stretched too thin and lose control. I will say, the trend these days is definitely toward wider spans of control.
And that brings us to our final section, Part 3, Setting Power and Rules. This covers our last 2 elements, which are all about where decisions get made and how strict the rule book is.
Next up, centralization versus decentralization. This is really all about one question. Where does the decision-making power live? In a centralized organization, the big decisions are all made at the top. But in a decentralized company, that authority gets pushed down the ladder, empowering the people on the front lines to make decisions quickly and respond to issues faster.
And our final element is formalization. This is simply about how many rules and procedures you have. Think about a highly formalized job, like working on a production line. There are strict instructions for everything you do. Now compare that to a low formalization job, like a creative director, where there's a ton of freedom in how you approach your work. So, to bring this all together, here's the most important takeaway. None of these 6 elements exist in a vacuum. They're all interconnected. A manager's job is to perform a balancing act, mixing and matching these elements to create a structure that actually fits what the company is trying to do. You'd expect a creative ad agency to look very, very different from a nuclear power plant, right? Well, that's exactly as it should be. And that leaves us with one final, big question to think about. In a world with more remote work, AI, and super flexible teams, which of these traditional building blocks do you think is going to have to change the most? Is it the rigid chain of command? Or maybe the whole idea of formalization? It's a fascinating question, as the very nature of organizing continues to evolve right in front of us.